They didn't send me an invitation. They sent me a letter. I want to start there, because that's the part people always ask about first. Not the divorce. Not the years I spent rebuilding myself with nobody watching. The letter. The one my mother slid across a white tablecloth at Bellarosa, the restaurant my grandfather built with his own hands, on the night that was supposed to be my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. I was 40 years old, and I still remember the sound the envelope made against the linen. Soft. Deliberate. My mother, Diane, had chosen this moment on purpose, surrounded by the good silver, a string quartet she'd hired, 40 of our closest family friends drinking champagne 2 tables over. She wanted witnesses. She just didn't expect the audience she got. "This is easier in writing," she said, folding her hands the way she used to before she said grace over Sunday dinner. The family talked it over. "You're no longer trustee of your grandfather's estate. Effective tonight." My younger sister, Renata, already had her phone raised. Not to call anyone. To record. She runs a lifestyle channel, with 400,000 subscribers, mostly women who like watching her cry prettily about boundaries and self-care. She'd been building tonight's content for a week. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I just watched the little red dot blink at me across the table like a held breath. My brother Marcus sat back, arms crossed, the posture of a man who'd rehearsed this. Our father, Walter, said nothing at all. He hadn't said much of anything to me in 3 years, not since the divorce, not since I supposedly embarrassed the family by falling apart in public instead of quietly, the way you're meant to. I opened the envelope. Read every line. 2 paragraphs, notarized, cold as a hospital form. Grace Whitfield is hereby removed as trustee of the Whitfield Family Trust, effective immediately, per unanimous vote of remaining beneficiaries. Unanimous. Meaning even my father had signed it. Meaning this wasn't a decision. It was an ambush with paperwork. I want to tell you I cried. That's what they were waiting for. Instead, I folded the letter back along its crease, set it beside my water glass, and smiled. Because 3 years ago, when this restaurant came 6 weeks from losing everything, I was the one who saved it. And not one person at that table knew it was me. To understand why I smiled, you have to understand who I was before that dinner. Not who they thought I was. Who I actually was. 5 years earlier, I was Grace Ferris, married 15 years to a man named Paul, mother of 1 grown daughter, Sophie, and by every outward measure, the settled one in my family. Walter and Diane had 2 other children who caused them worry, Marcus, who ran the family restaurant into shaky waters more than once, and Renata, who dropped 3 careers before she found one that paid her to overshare online. I was the reliable one. The one who didn't need checking on. Then Paul left. Not dramatically, no affair, no scandal, just a quiet, devastating announcement over coffee that he'd grown in a different direction. I was 40. I had spent almost 2 decades organizing my identity around a marriage that ended with less warning than a weather report. Here's the part that still surprises people: my family didn't rally around me. They rallied around Paul. He'd always been easy for them, golfed with my father, indulged my mother's opinions, remembered Marcus's birthday when I sometimes forgot my own. When the marriage ended, it was framed, gently but unmistakably, as something I hadn't managed well enough to prevent. My mother told me, not unkindly, marriages take work, Grace. I just wish you'd worked harder. Paul kept coming to Christmas for 2 more years. I stopped being invited to things where it might be awkward. I won't pretend the years right after were good ones. I sold the house. Downsized to a 1-bedroom apartment I told no one felt like a demotion. I took a job answering phones for a small property management company because I needed something, anything, structured to get out of bed for. I drove a 12-year-old Honda. If you'd looked at my life from the outside during that time, you'd have seen exactly what my family saw, a woman quietly falling behind. What you wouldn't have seen was the property manager, Denise, who started teaching me the business behind the desk I was answering phones at. How distressed properties get valued. How small investors buy low, hold, and build slow, unglamorous wealth nobody claps for. I started with one duplex, financed with nearly everything I had left after the settlement. Then another. I didn't tell my family, because I'd noticed something. Every time I mentioned anything going well, it got quietly minimized, like good news from me was a category error. So I stopped mentioning things. I let them believe the version of me that was easier for them to feel sorry for. By the time of that anniversary dinner, I owned 11 properties through a company called Larkspur Holdings. My family thought I was still answering phones for someone else. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because it's the only way the rest of this story makes sense, because on paper, that night, I was the failure being formally cut loose. And I was the only person in that restaurant who knew exactly how untrue that was. 3 years before that dinner, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Denise. "Grace," she said, no preamble, "isn't your family's restaurant called Bellarosa?" I sat up in the dark, heart already going. Why? Because I just saw a notice of default cross my desk. They took out an expansion loan 2 years ago to build that back patio, and they've missed 4 payments. They're 6 weeks from a foreclosure auction. I hadn't heard a word about any of it. Not from my mother, not from Marcus, who'd taken over day-to-day operations from our father. I called Marcus the next morning, careful, casual, the way I'd learned to approach my family by then, never with alarm, because alarm from me always somehow became about me. He was defensive before I'd finished the question. "We're handling it," he said. "It's a cash flow thing. We don't need help." Then, quieter, meaner, "especially not from you." I understood, in that moment, something I'd suspected for a while. If I offered to help directly, it would be refused on principle. Not because the money wasn't needed. Because it was coming from me. So I didn't offer. I called a real estate attorney I trusted, a woman named Priya, and asked her a question I didn't fully understand the weight of yet. Could a private buyer purchase a defaulted note directly from a bank, before a foreclosure auction, without the property owner ever knowing who the buyer was? She said yes. It's called buying the note. Banks often prefer to offload a defaulted loan at a discount to a private investor rather than absorb the cost and time of a full foreclosure auction. If I bought the note, I wouldn't own the restaurant. I'd own the debt. I would become, quietly, the lender my family owed money to, instead of a bank that would have taken the building the moment the clock ran out. It took 11 days, a shell entity, Larkspur Holdings, the same one that held my other properties, and nearly everything I'd built in 3 years of real estate to buy that note at a negotiated discount before the auction date. The bank was relieved to offload it. Marcus, as far as he ever knew, believed a private equity buyer had simply stepped in and restructured the loan into more forgiving terms. He told the family it was a lucky break. My mother said, at Thanksgiving that year, that someone up there was clearly looking out for this family, and I sat there with my wine and said nothing, because saying something would have required explaining 11 duplexes and a divorce settlement and 3 years of a life none of them had asked about. I didn't do it for credit. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to tell this story like some kind of secret hero arc, and it wasn't that clean. Some of it was love, genuine, uncomplicated love for a building that smelled like my grandfather's cooking, where I'd rolled dough on a step stool as a 5-year-old. And some of it, if I'm being fully honest, was something closer to control. If I couldn't be trusted, included, or believed in that family, I could at least make sure the thing they cared about most in the world didn't disappear on my watch. Quietly. Anonymously. On my terms. I paid the note down for 3 years. Restructured it twice more, always through Priya, always invisible. Bellarosa didn't just survive. It thrived. New espresso machine, renovated dining room, a write-up in a regional food magazine that Marcus framed and hung by the host stand. Nobody in my family ever asked who the investor was. It never occurred to them to ask. Why would it? I was just Grace. The one whose marriage fell apart. The one answering phones. Here's what nobody tells you about being quietly written off by your family. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in small ones, repeated so often they start to feel like weather. It was my mother introducing me at Renata's book launch as, my daughter, Grace, she's between things right now, to a room of strangers, while Renata got a full paragraph about her journey. It was Marcus scheduling the actual trust meetings, the legal ones, about my grandfather's estate, at times he somehow always forgot to tell me about. It was my father, at every family dinner for 3 years, asking Sophie polite questions about her job and never once asking me about mine, because in his mind there was nothing there worth asking. I want to be clear, I didn't correct any of it. That's the part I've had to sit with since. I let them believe I was smaller than I was, because it was easier than the alternative, because some quiet, wounded part of me almost enjoyed watching them underestimate a woman who was doing just fine without their help. I'm not proud of that. But I understand it now as a kind of armor. If they thought I had nothing, they couldn't take anything else from me. My daughter Sophie was the only person who knew the truth, the properties, Larkspur, the note on Bellarosa. She'd help me with paperwork some weekends, and she used to ask, gently, Mom, why don't you just tell them? I never had a good answer beyond, because I don't think they'd believe me, and if they did, I think it would just become one more thing about me that made them uncomfortable. So the years passed like that. Small, cumulative erasures. Diane started planning the 40th anniversary dinner 8 months out, string quartet, the private room at Bellarosa, 40 guests. I was, as always, one of the last to know a detail. 3 days before, Renata called to remind me it was an important family night, her voice carrying the particular brightness she uses right before she's about to film something. I should have heard it. I didn't. I showed up in the blue dress Sophie helped me pick out, feeling, for the first time in years, something almost like hope that this dinner might be a turning point, a night where my family finally looked at me and saw something other than a cautionary tale. Instead, I got an envelope beside the water glasses. I've already told you what I did after I read that letter. I smiled. What I haven't told you is what happened in the 60 seconds after that smile, because that's when the real evening began. Marcus leaned forward, mistaking my calm for shock still settling in. It's not personal, Grace, he said, using the tone people use right before something extremely personal. The trust needs someone actively involved in decisions. And there's a decision coming. Millbrook Hospitality made us an offer. A real one. 8 locations across 3 states, and they want to buy Bellarosa's name and recipes outright. Something cold moved through my chest. You're selling Grandpa's restaurant. We're selling a name, Marcus said. It becomes a franchise flagship. We all get paid. Mom and Dad retire comfortably. It's a smart move, and frankly, it doesn't need a trustee who hasn't set foot behind that host stand in 3 years holding it up. Across the table, I noticed for the first time that Paul was there. My ex-husband. Seated near my mother, at my parents' 40th anniversary, at the exact table where I was being formally erased from my grandfather's legacy. Nobody had thought to mention that either. He gave me a small, awkward wave, the kind you give someone at a funeral when you're not sure if you're allowed to smile. Diane reached over and patted my hand, the same gesture she'd used to soothe a child. We didn't want to blindside you, she said, which was, I noted, a genuinely remarkable sentence to say 4 minutes after blindsiding me. We just think this is best for the family's future. You understand. Renata's phone was still up. Still recording. I could see my own reflection in her phone case, small and blurry, smiling the smile that was making everyone at that table increasingly uneasy, because it wasn't the reaction the script called for. "Marcus," I said, "when's the last time you or Dad actually looked at the loan documents on this building? Not the P&L. The actual line." He blinked. "The bank restructured that years ago. It's not relevant to a name and recipe sale." "It's entirely relevant," I said, "because you don't just need the trust's approval to sell this building free and clear. You need the lien holders." "The bank doesn't care who runs the place," Marcus said, impatient now. "They just want their payments." "It's not the bank anymore," I said. "It hasn't been the bank in 3 years." The table went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when it senses, before it understands, that something has shifted. "What are you talking about?" Diane said. I reached into my handbag, the same handbag I'd carried for 4 years, plain, unremarkable, exactly the kind of handbag a woman, between things, would carry, and took out a folder Priya had prepared 2 weeks earlier, back when I'd first heard whispers through Sophie that a sale might be coming. I didn't know I'd need it tonight. Some instinct told me to bring it anyway. I set it on the table next to the letter that had removed me as trustee. 3 years ago, the bank sold the note on this building to a private holding company before the foreclosure auction went through. That company restructured your loan twice since, always in your favor. It's the reason Bellarosa didn't close in a sheriff's sale the same spring you built the new patio. Marcus's jaw tightened. "We know that. Some investors stepped in. Dad thanked God for it at Thanksgiving, if you'll recall." "The investor," I said, "is Larkspur Holdings. I own Larkspur Holdings." I want to describe the silence that followed accurately, because it wasn't dramatic in the way television makes these moments dramatic. Nobody gasped. Nobody dropped a glass. My father, Walter, who hadn't spoken a full sentence to me in 3 years, said only, very quietly, "Grace." Not a question. Just my name, like he was checking it still belonged to the person he thought he knew. "You," Diane said. "You're the one who." "I am." I kept my voice even, the way I'd practiced staying even through 3 years of small erasures I'd never once corrected. "I've held the note on this building since the spring after my divorce, back when I was, in this family's words, between things. I've restructured it twice to keep your payments manageable. I did it anonymously because I knew that if I did it with my name on it, it would become a referendum on me instead of a rescue of the restaurant. Which, it seems, was the right call, since you just removed me as trustee at the same dinner where you're planning to sell the building out from under a lien I hold." Renata's phone lowered, slowly, the recording light still blinking, forgotten now. "So no," I said, looking at Marcus, "Millbrook doesn't just need trust approval. They need mine. Separately. As the party is actually holding the debt on this building. And given tonight, I find myself a great deal less inclined to make that easy. I could tell you this is the part where I burned it all down. When I called in the note, forced the sale to collapse, made every one of them feel the full weight of 3 years of being underestimated. I thought about it, in the car afterward, hands shaking on the steering wheel in a way they hadn't while I sat at that table. But that isn't what I did, and I think it's the more important half of this story. 2 weeks later, I met Marcus alone, no letters, no cameras. I told him I wouldn't block the trust's decisions going forward, and I wouldn't call in the note early or use it as leverage against the family. What I asked for instead was simpler, and harder for him to hear, to be included. Not thanked, not celebrated, included. Told about the loan meetings. Consulted before the Millbrook offer went further. Treated, going forward, like someone whose judgment had actually been proven, rather than someone managed around. I told my mother something similar, in a shorter conversation that ended with her crying in a way I hadn't seen since my grandfather's funeral. I didn't comfort her the way I once would have, reflexively, at my own expense. I let the discomfort sit there between us, because I think, for the first time, she needed to feel it rather than have me smooth it over. Renata never posted the video. I don't know if that was decency or damage control, and I've decided I don't need to know. She deleted the raw footage in front of me, unprompted, about a week after the dinner. It was the closest thing to an apology she's given me. Paul texted me 2 days later. I have no idea why, and I didn't respond. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be noticed and set down. The trustee letter still stands, technically. I haven't asked them to reverse it, and I'm not sure I want them to. There's something almost freeing about not holding a title in a family that only offered it to me by default, never by choice. What I hold instead is quieter, and considerably more real, the actual, legal, unshakable proof that when it mattered, I was the one who didn't walk away. Bellarosa is still standing. Still ours, my grandfather's name still over the door, no Millbrook signage in sight. Marcus calls me now before decisions get made, not after. It's not warm, exactly. But it's honest, and honesty is further than we'd gotten in 3 years. My mother sent me a card on my birthday this spring. Just a card, nothing dramatic, but it was the first one in 3 years that didn't feel like an obligation to check off a list. Inside, she'd written one line, "I'm sorry I only saw what I expected to see." I keep it in the same drawer as Priya's original folder, the note documents, the restructuring agreements, 3 years of quiet, unglamorous proof. Not as a trophy. As a reminder that being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best doesn't mean you're actually small. Sometimes it just means you've gotten very good at being quiet about the size of the life you're actually building. Renata asked me last month if she could interview me for her channel. The real story, she said. People would want to hear it from you. I told her I'd think about it. I'm still thinking about it. If you've ever been the one your family quietly wrote off, the difficult one, the unstable one, the one who somehow became the explanation for things that had nothing to do with you, I'd like to hear how you handled it. Tell me in the comments. And if this story felt like it was worth your time tonight, stay close. Because 6 months isn't the end of this. It's just the part one was ready to tell you first.